What a night to be wandering. Come in, close the door behind you. You've found the right place. The rain is heavy tonight, and the wind is bitter. You've travelled far enough. Make yourself comfortable. The fire's been lit for hours, and it's not going anywhere, and neither am I. I am the keeper of the old stories, the ones too long for daylight, too strange for ordinary conversation, but too important to let the world forget. You won't need to stay awake for all of it. Just sit back, let the fire do its work, and listen. This place has a way of finding those who need it. Welcome to the Nox Archiva. Tonight, I want to tell you a story. Not a story about kings or battles or empires, though a few of those will pass by in the distance. Tonight's story is quieter than that. It's the story of an idea, perhaps the most remarkable idea human beings have ever had. But for most of human history, it wasn't obvious at all. And the story of how a few people, in a few scattered places, over a few thousand years, slowly taught our species how to think, is one of the strangest and most beautiful stories there is. This is the story of philosophy. You don't need to follow every word. You don't need to remember any names. If you drift off somewhere between ancient Greece and 19th century Germany, that's perfectly fine. That's the whole point. The ideas will still be here tomorrow. They've waited thousands of years already. So settle in, get comfortable, let your breathing slow down. And let's begin, as all good stories do, at the beginning. What philosophy actually is. Before we meet any philosophers, let's take a moment, a slow, unhurried moment, to ask what philosophy actually is. Because the word gets used in strange ways. People talk about a company's philosophy, or a coach's philosophy, or their personal philosophy of never checking email after 9 o'clock. That's not quite what we mean tonight. The word itself comes from ancient Greek. Philo meaning love, Sophia meaning wisdom. Philosophy is, quite literally, the love of wisdom. And notice something gentle hidden inside that name. It doesn't say the possession of wisdom. It doesn't say the mastery of wisdom. It says the love of it, the reaching toward it. Philosophy, from its very first breath, was defined not as having answers, but as caring deeply about the questions, and what questions they are. Philosophy asks the questions that sit underneath all the other questions. Science asks, how does the world work? Philosophy asks, what is the world really? And how could we ever know? History asks, what happened? Philosophy asks, what does it mean for anything to happen at all? Law asks, what are the rules? Philosophy asks, what makes a rule just in the first place? There are a few great rooms in the house of philosophy, and we'll wander through all of them tonight, slowly, with no particular hurry. There is metaphysics, the study of what exists. What is reality made of? Is there anything beyond the physical world? Why is there something rather than nothing? There is epistemology, the study of knowledge itself. How do we know what we know? Can we trust our senses? Could everything we believe be wrong? There is ethics, perhaps the warmest room in the house. How should we live? What do we owe each other? What is a good life? And how would we recognize one if we were living it? And there is logic, the study of reasoning itself. What makes an argument sound? How can we tell good thinking from bad? Here is the thing to hold on to, loosely, as you sink a little deeper into your pillow. Every human being who has ever lived has brushed up against these questions. Lying awake at night, wondering if things could have gone differently, grieving someone, and wondering where they've gone. Watching the stars and feeling suddenly, dizzyingly small. Those moments, those quiet, private moments, are philosophy in its rawest form. The philosophers we'll meet tonight didn't invent those feelings. They simply refused to look away from them. So that's what philosophy is. Not a subject, not a career. A very old, very human refusal to stop asking why. Now, let me tell you how it all began. The age of myth. To understand how remarkable the birth of philosophy was, you have to picture the world before it. Imagine you are alive 3,000 years ago. You live in a small village, perhaps on a hillside in Greece, perhaps beside a river in Mesopotamia. You wake before dawn. You work the land. And all around you, every single day, the world does things you cannot explain. The sky darkens without warning, and fire splits it in two. The earth, which is supposed to be the one solid thing, sometimes shudders beneath your feet. The river that feeds your family floods one year and vanishes the next. People you love fall sick from nothing you can see, and some of them do not recover. How do you make sense of any of it? The answer every early culture arrived at, independently, all over the world, was story. The lightning isn't random, it's Zeus hurling his thunderbolts. The sea isn't indifferent, it's Poseidon, and he is angry today. The harvest failed because a goddess is grieving. The plague came because someone, somewhere, offended the divine. We sometimes look back on mythology as primitive, but pause with me for a moment, in the dark, and notice how reasonable it was. Myth took a terrifying, chaotic universe and made it legible. It gave the world a face. If the drought is caused by an angry god, then at least there is something you can do. You can pray, you can sacrifice, you can behave better. Myth gave people not just explanations, but a sense of agency in a world that offered them very little of it. And myth gave humanity its first great stories. Stories of such depth and beauty that we still tell them tonight, thousands of years later, to children at bedtime. The gods of Olympus, Gilgamesh searching for immortality, Osiris rising from death. For thousands of years, this was how humanity understood everything. The world was a story, and the gods were its authors. And then, in one small corner of the Mediterranean, around 2,500 years ago, a handful of people began to wonder if there might be another way. The first philosopher, Thales, and the question that changed everything. Our story truly begins in a place called Miletus. Picture it, a wealthy Greek trading city on the western coast of what is now Turkey, around the year 600 BCE. The harbour is crowded with ships from Egypt, from Phoenicia, from the Black Sea. The air smells of salt and cedar and foreign spices. Merchants argue in half a dozen languages. Ideas arrive in this city the same way goods do, constantly, from everywhere. And living in this city is a man named Thales. We know frustratingly little about him. He left no writings that survive, but we know the stories. It was said he predicted a solar eclipse, an astonishing feat for his time. It was said he measured the height of the Egyptian pyramids by measuring their shadows at the moment when his own shadow equaled his own height. It was said he once fell into a well because he was walking along staring at the stars, and a servant girl laughed at him, saying he was so eager to know the heavens that he couldn't see what was at his feet. Philosophers have been living down that joke for 26 centuries. But here is why Thales matters. Here is why, when historians are asked to name the first philosopher, they reach for him. Thales looked at the world. the same baffling, overwhelming world as everyone else. And he asked a new kind of question, not which god did this, but what is everything made of? Sit with that question for a moment. Feel how strange it is. It assumes that beneath all the world's dazzling variety, water and stone, flesh and fire, cloud and tree, there might be some single underlying stuff, some hidden unity, and it assumes something even more radical, that a human being, using nothing but observation and reason, might be able to figure out what that stuff is. Thales' answer was water. Everything he proposed is in some way made of water, and it's easy to smile at that, but look at his reasoning. Water is the only substance he could see in all three states: solid ice, liquid sea, rising mist. Water falls from the sky and springs from the earth. Every living thing needs it. Life gathers wherever it flows. If you had to bet on one substance being the secret ingredient of the universe, in 600 BCE, water was a genuinely brilliant guess. The answer was wrong. It doesn't matter. What matters, what changed the world, was the method. Thales proposed an explanation with no gods in it, an explanation based on observation, reasoned from evidence, and, crucially, open to challenge. Because his own students immediately disagreed with him, and he let them. One of them, Anaximenes, argued the fundamental stuff was air, which becomes fire when thinned and stone when compressed. Another, Anaximander, gave an answer of astonishing subtlety. The source of everything, he said, must be something indefinite, a boundless, formless something from which all things emerge and to which all things return. He even suggested that life began in water and that humans developed from earlier, fish-like creatures. He was groping, 24 centuries early, towards something like evolution. 3 men, 3 different answers. And nobody was executed for disagreeing. That culture of open, reasoned disagreement was the true invention. The answers would be corrected over the centuries. The conversation never stopped. It's still going on tonight in universities and laboratories all over the world. And you are, in a small way, part of it right now, just by listening. The River and the Road, Heraclitus and Parmenides. As the new way of thinking spread along the Greek coastline, it produced 2 philosophers so opposed to each other that their argument still hasn't ended. And their disagreement was about something so fundamental that it hides inside almost every philosophical question ever asked since. The question was this: does anything ever really change? In the city of Ephesus, not far from Miletus, lived a man named Heraclitus. He was, by every account, a difficult person, aristocratic, scornful, allergic to company. He deposited his book in a temple, some say, so that only those worthy of it would find it. The ancients nicknamed him the Obscure, and also the Weeping Philosopher, because he seemed to find the human condition mostly worth mourning. But what a vision he had! Heraclitus looked at the world and saw that nothing at all, holds still. The mountain is eroding, too slowly to see. The child is becoming an adult. The adult is becoming old. The candle flame that looks so steady is actually a process. New fuel constantly rising, burning, vanishing. Even the things that seem most permanent are simply changing at a pace too slow for our impatient eyes. His most famous image, and one of the most famous images in all of philosophy, was the river. You cannot step into the same river twice, he taught. The second time you step in, different water is flowing past your ankles. The river has changed. And, here is the deeper cut, so have you. The person who steps in the second time is not quite the person who stepped in the first. Reality, for Heraclitus, is not a collection of things. It is a flow, a fire, endlessly kindling and going out. Permanence is the illusion, change is the truth. And strife, tension, opposition, day pulling against night, winter against summer, is not a flaw in the world, it is the engine of it. The tension of the bowstring is what lets the arrow fly. Now travel with me gently across the sea to southern Italy, to a Greek colony called Elea, because there a philosopher named Parmenides looked at the same world and concluded the exact opposite. Parmenides did something no one had quite done before. He trusted logic over his own eyes. And his logic ran like this. Think about nothingness, about what does not exist. Can you actually do it? The moment you think about nothing, you've made it into something, a thing in your mind. Nothingness, Parmenides argued, is literally unthinkable, literally impossible. There is no such thing as nothing. But wait, follow the thread a little further, the way you might follow a thought as you're drifting off. If nothingness is impossible, then change is impossible too. Because for something new to come into being, it would have to emerge from what is not. And for something to pass away, it would have to dissolve into what is not. And what is not, isn't. Therefore, Parmenides concluded, calmly, devastatingly, nothing ever truly begins, and nothing ever truly ends. Reality is one single, unchanging, eternal whole. All the motion and change we think we see, the rivers and the flames and the seasons, all of it is a kind of dream, a deception of the senses. The truth is stillness. His student Zeno defended this astonishing claim with a set of paradoxes people still puzzle over. To walk across a room, Zeno said, you must first cross half of it. But before that, half of the half. And before that, half of that. An infinite number of steps. How can anyone complete an infinite number of tasks? Motion, he suggested with a smile, is impossible. And yet, there you are, walking across the room. So there it is. Heraclitus. Everything flows. Parmenides. Nothing moves. Both arguments compelling. Both cannot be true. And you may notice, as your thoughts loosen and soften, that this ancient argument feels strangely familiar. It's the tension between the part of you that knows everything passes, and the part of you that senses something in you has remained you through every change of your life. Philosophy doesn't resolve that tension. It just holds it up to the light, turning it slowly, like a stone found on a beach. The man who heard numbers. Pythagoras. Somewhere between the physicists of Miletus and the logicians of Elea, there lived a figure so wrapped in legend that we can barely see the man inside it. His name was Pythagoras, and yes, he's the same Pythagoras from the theorem you learned in school, the one about right-angled triangles. But the theorem is the least interesting thing about him. Pythagoras was born on the island of Samos around 570 BCE and eventually settled in southern Italy, where he founded something that was part school, part commune, part religious order. His followers lived together, held their property in common, followed strict rules, including, famously and mysteriously, a prohibition on eating beans, and were sworn to secrecy about the master's deepest teachings. Discoveries made by any member were credited to Pythagoras himself, which is one reason the legend swallowed the man. But at the heart of the Pythagorean movement was one idea, one genuinely staggering idea. The story goes that Pythagoras was passing a blacksmith shop and noticed that the hammers striking the anvil made different musical tones, and that the tones depended on the weights of the hammers. Whether or not that story is true, the Pythagoreans discovered something real and profound. Musical harmony is mathematics. Pluck a string, and it sounds a note. Press the string at exactly its halfway point, and pluck again. You hear the same note an octave higher, a ratio of 2 to 1. The perfect fifth is 3 to 2. The perfect fourth, 4 to 3. Think about what that means. Harmony, the thing that makes music beautiful, the thing that seems most purely emotional, most beyond words, turns out to be governed by simple, clean, whole number ratios. Beauty is number. And the Pythagoreans took the leap. If music is secretly mathematics, perhaps everything is. Perhaps the entire universe is built on number, proportion, ratio, harmony, hidden beneath the surface of things, waiting to be discovered. They spoke of the music of the spheres, the idea that the planets themselves, moving in their vast orbits, produce a cosmic harmony too constant for human ears to notice. It is a mystical idea. It is also, in a way, the founding intuition of modern science. Every physicist who writes an equation describing the behavior of galaxies or atoms is, whether they know it or not, a distant child of Pythagoras. Acting on the ancient faith that beneath the world's noise there is mathematics, and the mathematics can be known. The Pythagoreans also believed in the transmigration of souls, that the soul survives death and is reborn in new bodies, animal and human, again and again. Pythagoras was said to have once stopped a man from beating a dog, claiming he recognized in its cries the voice of a departed friend. Whatever else that story tells us, it tells us this. From very early on, philosophy was never only about the outer world. It was also about the soul, what it is, where it's going, and how it ought to be cared for. Hold that thought. We're going to need it, because the greatest caretaker of souls in the ancient world is waiting for us, just a little further down the road, in the crowded streets of Athens. The laughing philosopher, Democritus and the atom. But before we reach Athens, one more stop, because in the town of Abdera in northern Greece, a man named Democritus arrived at an idea so far ahead of its time that it wouldn't be confirmed for over 2,000 years. Democritus was known, in contrast to weeping Heraclitus, as the laughing philosopher, because he found human anxieties, vanities and dramas gently amusing. He travelled widely, wrote on everything from ethics to mathematics to music, and lived by ancient accounts past the age of 90, cheerful nearly to the end. His great idea, building on his teacher Leucippus, was an answer to the deadlock between Heraclitus and Parmenides. Remember the problem. Parmenides had proven, with iron logic, that true change is impossible. Yet the world visibly changes. How can both be honoured? Democritus's answer split the difference. Literally. Imagine, he said, taking an object, a loaf of bread, a stone, and cutting it in half, then cutting the half in half, then again and again and again. Can you go on forever? Democritus reasoned that you cannot. Eventually you must reach pieces so small they cannot be cut, indivisible particles. And the Greek for uncuttable is atomos, atoms. The universe, Democritus proposed, consists of nothing but atoms and empty space. The atoms themselves are eternal and unchanging. That satisfies Parmenides. But they move, collide, combine, and separate, and that endless recombination produces all the change and variety we see. That satisfies Heraclitus. a loaf of bread, a human body, a star, different arrangements of the same eternal particles. When you die, your atoms don't vanish. They scatter and become part of other things. The soil, the air, eventually, perhaps, someone else. He reached this conclusion with no microscope, no laboratory, no experiment, nothing but reasoning, pursued patiently to its end. And he was, in essence, right. When scientists in the 19th and 20th centuries finally confirmed the existence of atoms, they borrowed his word. Democritus went further still, into stranger and even more modern territory. Qualities like sweetness, bitterness, colour, and warmth, he suggested, don't exist in the objects themselves. They exist in us, in the way our senses respond to different atomic shapes. By convention sweet, he wrote, by convention bitter, in reality, atoms and void. The world, as we experience it, is a kind of translation, a rendering our minds produce. If that thought makes reality feel slightly dreamlike, the colours of your room, the softness of your blanket, all of it a collaboration between the world and your mind. Let it. It's a good thought to fall asleep inside. The gadfly of Athens, Socrates. And now, at last, Athens. We are now in the middle of the 5th century BCE, and Athens is the most extraordinary city in the world. The Persian invasions have been repelled. The Parthenon is rising, gleaming and new, on the Acropolis. In the theatres, Sophocles and Euripides are staging tragedies. In the assembly, ordinary citizens are voting on matters of war and peace. The strange new experiment called democracy. The agora, the great marketplace, hums from morning until dusk. Fishmongers and philosophers, politicians and potters, all shouting over one another under the Mediterranean sun. And moving through this crowd, barefoot, in a shabby cloak, famously ugly, with a snub nose and bulging eyes, is a man named Socrates. He is a stonemason's son. He served bravely as a soldier. He is married, poor, and apparently content to be poor. And he has developed a habit that is making him famous, then notorious, and eventually will make him immortal. He asks questions. That's all. He doesn't lecture. He doesn't charge fees, like the professional teachers called sophists, who train young men in the arts of persuasion. He simply approaches people, often important, confident, successful people, and asks them politely to explain something they claim to understand. A general, for instance. Socrates asks him, "What is courage?" The general laughs. An easy question for a military man. Courage is standing your ground in battle. But, Socrates asks gently, isn't it sometimes courageous to retreat, to wait? The general adjusts. Courage is a kind of endurance of the soul. But surely, Socrates says, some endurance is just stubbornness, foolishness even. Is foolish endurance courage? No, the general admits. So courage requires wisdom? It seems so. Then what exactly is this wisdom? And so it goes. Question by question, the general's confident definition dissolving in his hands like sugar in water. Until finally the great commander, who has faced death on the battlefield, is forced to admit that he can't actually say what courage is. This became known as the Socratic method, the practice of testing ideas through relentless, patient questioning. And notice something important. Socrates almost never supplies the correct answer himself. That was the deepest layer of his teaching. When the oracle at Delphi declared that no one in Greece was wiser than Socrates, he was baffled. He was sure he knew nothing. So he went looking for someone wiser. He questioned the politicians, the poets, the craftsmen. and he discovered that they all thought they knew things they could not actually explain. And he concluded, at last, what the oracle must have meant. He was wisest only in this one small way. He knew that he did not know. That sentence, "I know that I know nothing," might be the most important sentence in the history of thought. Because certainty is where thinking stops. The moment you're sure, you stop looking. Socrates' gift to humanity was a method for staying humble, staying curious, staying awake, intellectually awake, for an entire lifetime. Athens, however, did not thank him for it. You can imagine why. Being publicly questioned into confusion by a barefoot old man was humiliating. The young loved him. They followed him around, delighting in watching the pompous get punctured, imitating his methods on their own fathers. The powerful, increasingly, did not love him, and Athens itself was wounded and paranoid. It had just lost a long, devastating war to Sparta. Democracy had been briefly overthrown by tyrants, some of whom had been Socrates' associates. The city was in the mood to find someone to blame. In 399 BCE, when Socrates was 70 years old, 3 citizens formally charged him with impiety, disrespecting the gods of the city, and with corrupting the youth of Athens. The trial was held before a jury of 500 citizens. Socrates, given the chance to defend himself, did something almost incomprehensible. He refused to grovel, refused to weep, refused to parade his family before the jury for sympathy, as was customary. Instead, he questioned his accusers in front of everyone, as if the trial were just another conversation in the agora. He told the jury that far from harming Athens, he was the best thing that had ever happened to it. A gadfly, he said, sent to sting a large, lazy horse and keep it from sleeping through its own life. He suggested that instead of punishment, he deserved free meals at public expense, like an Olympic champion. The jury voted. Guilty. The penalty, death. His friends arranged an escape. Bribes were prepared. A route was planned. Exile was easy, expected. Half the jury probably assumed he'd take it. Socrates refused. He had lived his entire life under the laws of Athens, he explained, and had agreed, by staying, to abide by them. To flee now, just because the laws had gone against him, would make his whole life a lie. He was 70. He had said what he came to say. And so, on his final evening, surrounded by his weeping friends, Socrates bathed, said goodbye to his children, and calmly discussed philosophy, the immortality of the soul, fittingly, until the jailer brought the cup of poison hemlock. He is said to have taken it, in the words of those present, without trembling and without changing colour. He drank. He walked around until his legs grew heavy, as instructed. Then he lay down, and the numbness rose slowly from his feet, and his friends watched, and the most relentless questioner in human history grew quiet. He wrote nothing, not one page. Everything we know of him comes from others, above all from a young aristocrat who sat in that prison cell, watching his teacher die, and who would spend the rest of his life making sure the world never forgot it. That young man's name was Plato. The Cave and the Sun. Plato. Plato was around 28 years old when Socrates was executed, and the event broke something in him, and built something in its place. He had been born into one of the most distinguished families in Athens. A political career had been his obvious destiny. But he had watched democracy, the celebrated Athenian democracy, put the best man he knew to death for the crime of asking questions. Politics, he concluded, was diseased, and he would devote his life to finding the cure. He travelled for years, Egypt, Italy, Sicily, absorbing Pythagorean mathematics and mysticism. And when he returned to Athens, he did two things that changed history. First, he founded a school in a grove of olive trees just outside the city walls, sacred to a hero named Academus. It became known as the Academy. And yes, that is where our words academy and academic come from. It endured in one form or another for over 900 years. It is often called the first university in the Western world. Second, he wrote, and here Plato made a choice of quiet genius. He did not write treatises or lectures. He wrote dialogues, little dramas, scenes of conversation, almost plays. And the hero of nearly all of them is Socrates. In dialogue after dialogue, the old man walks again through Athens, questioning generals about courage, politicians about justice, lovers about love. Plato's revenge on the city that killed his teacher was to make that teacher immortal. And philosophy itself, in these pages, is not a doctrine to be memorized. It is a conversation you are invited into. 24 centuries later, the invitation still stands. At the heart of Plato's own philosophy lies a single haunting image, perhaps the most famous image in all of Western thought. It's called the allegory of the cave. Imagine a cave, deep underground. In this cave, prisoners have been chained since childhood. Chained so they cannot move, cannot even turn their heads. They can only face the cave's back wall. Behind them, higher up, a fire burns, and between the fire and the prisoners runs a walkway where people carry objects, statues, figures of animals, shapes of all kinds, whose shadows are thrown by the firelight onto the wall the prisoners face. Shadows are all the prisoners have ever seen, flickering shapes on stone. And so, naturally, inevitably, the prisoners take the shadows to be reality. They name the shadows, they study their patterns, they hold competitions in predicting which shadow will come next, and honor the champions. Their entire world is the wall. Now, Plato says, imagine one prisoner is freed. He is turned around, painfully because his muscles have never moved, and sees the fire. The light stabs his eyes. He is dragged, resisting, up the long, rough passage toward the mouth of the cave and out into the sunlight. And he is blinded. The world above is unbearable at first. But slowly, very slowly, his eyes adjust. He sees shadows first, then reflections in water, then the things themselves. Trees, mountains, sky. And finally, at last, he is able to lift his eyes and look at the sun itself, the source of all the light, the thing that makes seeing possible at all. And then comes the part of the story that always lands in any century. The freed prisoner thinks of the friends he left below, still chained, still naming shadows, and he goes back down to tell them, to free them. But his eyes, accustomed now to sunlight, fumble in the dark. He seems clumsy to the prisoners, ruined, raving, babbling about a world above, about the sun of all things. And Plato says, if the prisoners could get their hands on the one trying to unchain them and drag them upward, would they not kill him? Plato watched them do exactly that to Socrates with a cup of hemlock. The cave is an allegory for Plato's entire philosophy. The world we see, this world of shifting appearances, of things that grow and fade, is the wall of shadows. But there is, he taught, a higher reality, a realm of perfect, eternal forms. Every beautiful thing you've ever seen is a flickering shadow of beauty itself. every just act, a shadow of justice itself. Every circle you've ever drawn is imperfect, but the perfect circle, the one mathematicians reason about, exists, timeless and flawless, in that higher realm. The physical world is a copy, the forms are the original, and the philosopher is simply the prisoner who has turned around, who has begun the long, uncomfortable climb out of the cave toward the sun. You don't have to believe in the realm of forms. Most philosophers today don't, at least not in Plato's full-blooded version. But everyone recognizes the cave. Everyone has had the experience of an old certainty dissolving, of realizing that something they'd taken for solid truth was only a shadow on a wall. And everyone knows how the world resists the person who comes back down the tunnel with strange news. One of the students at Plato's academy, though, a doctor's son from the north, who studied there for 20 years, looked at his teacher's magnificent vision of a higher world and respectfully, thoroughly took it apart. The man who organized everything, Aristotle. Aristotle arrived at the academy at 17 and stayed until Plato's death. 20 years of study under one of the greatest philosophers to live. Plato is said to have called him the mind of the school. And yet, Aristotle's whole philosophy begins with a polite, devastating disagreement with everything the cave allegory stands for. Plato said, "The truth lies beyond this world. Turn away from the shadows and seek the eternal forms." Aristotle said, "No, look harder at this world. The truth isn't behind the curtain. The truth is in the grain of the wood, the wing of the insect, the reasoning of the mind, the constitution of the city. There is no separate realm of forms," he argued. "The form of a thing lives in the thing, the way the shape of a statue is in the marble, not floating in heaven. If you want to understand horses, don't contemplate the eternal form of horse. Go and study horses." And study he did. It is genuinely difficult to convey the scale of what Aristotle studied. He wrote on logic, physics, astronomy, meteorology, zoology, botany, psychology, ethics, politics, rhetoric, poetry, and metaphysics. And in several of these fields, he wasn't contributing to the subject, he was founding it. He waded through lagoons on the island of Lesbos, collecting marine specimens, dissecting, cataloguing, describing hundreds of species. Some of his observations about octopuses and catfish were dismissed as fanciful until modern biologists confirmed them 2,000 years later. He essentially invented formal logic, the systematic study of what makes an argument valid, and his system stood as the final word on the subject for over 2 millennia. When Plato died and the academy passed to another, Aristotle left Athens and accepted a most unusual tutoring job. King Philip of Macedon, the rising power to the north, wanted a teacher for his teenage son. So for several years, the greatest mind in Greece tutored a boy named Alexander, who would grow up to conquer everything from Greece to Egypt to the edge of India, and be remembered as Alexander the Great. What passed between them, we mostly don't know. It is one of history's most tantalizing classrooms. Eventually, Aristotle returned to Athens and founded his own school, the Lyceum, where he liked to walk as he lectured, so his followers were called the Peripatetics, the ones who walk around. But here is the part of Aristotle to carry with you, his ethics. Because Aristotle asked the warmest of philosophical questions, what is a good human life? And his answer is one of the most humane ever given. Every craft and inquiry, he observed, aims at some good, but most goods are wanted for the sake of something else. Why do you want money? to buy security, comfort. Why security? To live without fear. Keep pulling the thread and everything leads, eventually, to one thing wanted purely for itself: eudaimonia. It's usually translated as happiness, but it means something richer: flourishing, living well and doing well. A life you could look back on, entire, and call good. And how do you get there? Not through pleasure alone, Aristotle said. A life of pleasure is a life fit for cattle. Not through honor. That depends on other people's opinions. You flourish, he argued, by excelling at being human, by developing the virtues, courage, honesty, generosity, patience, justice, until they become second nature. And each virtue, he noticed, lives at a midpoint between two vices. Courage sits between cowardice and recklessness. Generosity between stinginess and wastefulness. Confidence between self-loathing and arrogance. He called this the doctrine of the golden mean. And the point is not mediocrity, not lukewarm half measures, but calibration, the right response, in the right amount, at the right time, toward the right people. And how do you become courageous, or patient, or kind? Aristotle's answer is almost disarmingly practical. By practicing. You become brave by doing brave things, small ones at first. You become patient by practicing patience. We are what we repeatedly do. His teaching is often summarized. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Goodness, in other words, is not a talent you're born with or a rule you memorize. It's a craft, like carpentry or music. You get better at being human the same way you get better at anything, slowly, through practice, with some bad days along the way. And many centuries later, it's still some of the best advice anyone has ever given. The Man in the Barrel, Diogenes and the Cynics. Not everyone in Athens, however, believed the good life required lecture halls and treatises. While Plato taught in his olive grove and Aristotle catalogued the world, a man was living in the streets of Athens in a large ceramic storage jar, a barrel as tradition remembers it, owning almost nothing and mocking them all. His name was Diogenes, and he is philosophy's great troublemaker. He came from the city of Sinope on the Black Sea, which he'd been exiled from, allegedly over a scandal involving defaced currency. When someone later taunted him about it, he replied that the people of Sinope condemned him to exile, and he condemned them to stay in Sinope. Diogenes believed that philosophy had already become too comfortable, too wordy, too clever, too far from life. Virtue, he insisted, isn't found in theories. It's found in how you live, and everything else, wealth, status, reputation, fine manners, soft beds, is not just unnecessary but corrupting. So he threw it all away and lived like a stray dog, deliberately, sleeping in his jar, eating whatever came, performing every part of life shamelessly in public. His school was called the Cynics, from the Greek word for dog, and he wore the insult as a title. The stories about him are endless, and they were the whole point. His life was his argument. He was seen carrying a lit lamp through the marketplace in broad daylight. Asked what he was doing, he said he was looking for an honest human being. He owned a single wooden bowl, and one day, seeing a child drink water from cupped hands, he threw the bowl away, delighted to be beaten in simplicity by a child. When Plato defined a human being as a featherless biped, Diogenes plucked a chicken, carried it into the academy, and announced, "Here is Plato's human." And then there is the most famous story of all. Alexander the Great, the most powerful man alive, Aristotle's old student, came to see the famous philosopher, and found him lying in the sun. Standing over him, Alexander announced that he would grant Diogenes anything he wished, any favour, anything in the world. Diogenes looked up and said, "Yes, move a little. You're blocking my sunlight." Alexander's companions laughed. But Alexander reportedly said, "Truly, if I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes," because he understood what he had just seen. Here was the one man in the empire who wanted nothing, and a man who wants nothing cannot be bribed, cannot be threatened, cannot be ruled. Diogenes, sunbathing in poverty, was freer than the conqueror of the world. The Cynics never built a great system of thought. That was never the aim. Their gift to philosophy was a question that never stops being uncomfortable. How much of what you're chasing do you actually need? And their example planted a seed, the idea that peace comes not from getting more, but from needing less. A gentler, more practical school was about to grow from that seed. 2 schools, in fact, and they would teach the ancient world how to be calm. The Garden, Epicurus and the Art of Simple Pleasure. After Alexander's conquests, the world changed. The old intimate city-states, where a citizen could know his leaders by face and voice, dissolved into vast kingdoms ruled from distant palaces. People felt small in a way they hadn't before, like passengers on a ship whose course they couldn't influence. And philosophy changed with them. The great question shifted from what is the ideal state to something more personal, more urgent, more like a hand on the shoulder. How can one person in an uncertain world find peace? 2 answers emerged in Athens, almost side by side. The first came from a quiet man with a garden. His name was Epicurus. Around 306 BCE, he bought a house with a garden just outside Athens, and there he founded a community that scandalized the city, not through wild living, but through its gentleness. The garden admitted women as equals. It admitted slaves. Inside its walls, people of every rank studied, conversed, and shared simple meals: bread, cheese, olives, water, a little wine on feast days. Over the gate, tradition says, stood an inscription welcoming the stranger. "Here our highest good is pleasure." Now, that word, pleasure, has haunted Epicurus for 2,000 years. His name became a byword for indulgence. An Epicurean today is a person devoted to fine food and luxury. And it is almost perfectly wrong, because when Epicurus examined pleasure carefully, like the philosopher he was, he found something surprising. The greatest pleasure, he concluded, is not intensity, it is absence. The absence of pain in the body and the absence of turmoil in the soul. He called that state ataraxia, tranquility, untroubledness. Think of the feeling when a headache finally lifts, when a dreaded conversation is over and went fine, when you slide into bed at the end of a long day and realize nothing hurts and nothing is wrong. That, Epicurus taught, is the summit of pleasure. Everything beyond it is just variation. And once you see that, everything simplifies. Luxury doesn't just fail to help. It actively hurts because it breeds dependency and endless anxious wanting. Desires, he taught, come in kinds. Some are natural and necessary. Food, shelter, warmth, friendship. And these are cheap and easy to satisfy. Some are natural but unnecessary, fine food rather than plain. And some are neither natural nor necessary, fame, power, boundless wealth. And these can never be satisfied at all, because they have no natural stopping point. The secret of contentment is simply to want the wantable. Bread and water, Epicurus said, give the highest pleasure, when they come to one who needs them. Above all other goods, he prized friendship. Of everything wisdom provides for a happy life, he taught, by far the greatest is the possession of friends. The garden was exactly that, an experiment in living quietly among people you love. But there was one enemy of peace that Epicurus took most seriously of all, and it's the one waiting for all of us in the dark: the fear of death. Most human misery, he believed, flows secretly from this fear. It drives the frantic chasing of wealth and fame, the desperate attempts to matter, the inability to sit still. And so he offered an argument, one of the most famous in all philosophy, meant to work like medicine. Death, he said, is nothing to us. Here is why. All good and bad, all pleasure and pain, exist only in experience, in sensation. And death is, precisely, the end of sensation. So, follow it gently. Where death is, you are not. And where you are, death is not. The two of you can never actually meet. You will never experience being dead, any more than you experienced the endless centuries before your birth. And were those pre-birth ages terrible for you? They were nothing at all. Death, Epicurus taught, is the same nothing, on the other side. You may find the argument convincing, you may not. Philosophers still argue about it. But notice what Epicurus was doing. He was using philosophy the way a doctor uses medicine. Empty are the words of a philosopher, he said, that heal no human suffering. Philosophy, for the garden, was therapy, care of the soul. He died at 72, in severe pain from a stone blocking his bladder. And on his final day, he wrote to a friend that the pain was as great as pain could be. And yet against it all, he set the joy of remembering their conversations together, and called it a happy day. He had spent his life teaching that a well-tended mind could outweigh a suffering body. As far as we can tell, in the end, his own medicine worked. The painted porch. The Stoics. At almost the same moment on the other side of Athens, in the agora itself, under a colonnade decorated with murals called the painted porch, the Stoa Poikilou, a very different school was gathering. From that porch they took their name, the Stoics. Their founder was Zeno of Citium, a Phoenician merchant from Cyprus, whose story begins with catastrophe. He was shipwrecked, his cargo, by some accounts his entire fortune, lost to the sea. Washed up in Athens with nothing, he wandered into a bookshop and heard the bookseller reading aloud about Socrates. Transfixed, Zeno asked where a man like that could be found today. The bookseller pointed at a passing cynic philosopher and said, "Follow him." Zeno did. Years later, he would joke that he made a prosperous voyage when he suffered shipwreck. It is the most stoic origin story imaginable. The worst day of his life turned out to be the door to the best of it. The philosophy Zeno built, refined over centuries by others, begins with a single distinction, so simple you can hold it in one hand, so deep you can spend a lifetime learning it. Some things are up to us, most things are not. What's up to us are our judgments, our choices, our values, our responses. And what's not up to us are our health, our reputation, the economy, the weather, the past, other people, their opinions, their actions, their affection. And the Stoics' diagnosis of human misery is this: nearly all of it comes from confusing the two, from staking our peace on things that we can't control, demanding that the uncontrollable behave, that other people cooperate, that life go according to plan, and then shattering when it doesn't. Freedom, they taught, begins the moment you place your well-being entirely in the things you can control, in your own character and choices, the one territory no fortune can invade. From this root grew their strangest and most useful teaching. It is not events that disturb us, but our judgments about events. Between the world and your suffering, there is always a step, an interpretation, a story you tell, and that step belongs to you. The insult only wounds if you accept its verdict. The setback is only a catastrophe if you name it one. This is not denial. Stoics were unflinching about pain, loss, and death. It is a claim about where your power lives. And notably, modern cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the most effective psychological treatments ever developed, is built explicitly on this Stoic insight. The Stoics also gave the ancient world a breathtaking moral idea: cosmopolitanism. The whole universe, they taught, is ordered by a single rational principle, the Logos, and every human being carries a spark of it, which means every human being, Greek or barbarian, slave or emperor, is a citizen of one great city, the cosmos. 23 centuries before the phrase existed, the Stoics were arguing for something like universal human dignity. And here is the marvelous thing about Stoicism. You can watch it work in the lives of three utterly different Romans. Seneca was one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the empire, a statesman, a playwright, and, in a dark twist of fate, tutor and advisor to the Emperor Nero. His letters to his friend Lucilius are among the most humane documents antiquity produced. Warm, witty, self-aware, honest about his own failures to live up to his ideals. He wrote that we suffer more often in imagination than in reality, that the disasters we rehearse at night mostly never arrive, while the dread of them is a tax we pay voluntarily. When Nero finally turned on him, as everyone knew he someday would, and sent the order to die, Seneca opened his veins calmly, comforting his weeping friends. Had they not been rehearsing for exactly this all along? Epicurus was born a slave. His very name means acquired. His master, by some accounts, broke his leg, leaving him lame for life. Eventually freed, he became the most revered philosophy teacher of his age, and everything in his teaching glows with the authority of a man who had owned nothing, not even himself, and had found freedom anyway. You can chain my leg, he taught, but not my will. Not even Zeus can conquer a person's power to choose their response. His students recorded his lectures, and those notes, blunt, funny, drill sergeant tough, have steadied readers for 19 centuries, including, famously, prisoners of war who credited Epicurus with their psychological survival. And Marcus Aurelius was the Emperor of Rome, the most powerful human being on the planet. And at night, in a military camp on the German frontier, with a plague gutting his empire and war grinding on and his own health failing, this man opened a private notebook and wrote philosophy to himself. Reminders, corrections, consolations. You will encounter meddling, ungrateful, arrogant people today, he tells himself, and none of them can implicate you in ugliness or make you angry without your participation. The happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts. He never intended anyone to read it. The notebook survived. We call it the Meditations, and it remains perhaps the most intimate document ever left behind by absolute power, proof that the emperor of the world and the slave were, in the school of the porch, working on exactly the same assignment. 3 stories: the slave, the statesman, the emperor. 1 philosophy. That was always the Stoic point. Circumstances are the cards you're dealt. Character is how you play them. And the game, they insisted, in the camp, in the palace, or in chains or wherever, is always available to be played well, depending on how you decide to look at it. The suspended mind, the skeptics. There was one more Hellenistic school, and it may be the strangest and most restful of all, because its path to peace ran not through answers, but through the letting go of answers entirely. They were called the Skeptics, and their patron saint was a man named Pyrrho, who had travelled east with Alexander's army all the way to India, where he reportedly encountered sages whose serenity astonished him. When he returned to Greece, he began teaching something radical, that for every argument, an equal and opposite argument can be found. The dogmatists, the Stoics, the Epicureans, everyone with a confident system, were, he suggested, claiming a certainty no human actually possesses. Honey seems sweet, but does it seem sweet to everyone, in every condition? Customs held sacred in one land are crimes in another. The senses conflict, the schools conflict, the sages conflict. And so the skeptic practice was this. Whenever you feel yourself being pulled into a confident judgment, this is true, this is false, this is good, this is outrageous, pause. Set the arguments side by side. Notice that the matter is less settled than it feels. And then suspend judgment. Simply decline to conclude. They called this suspension epoche. And here is the part they discovered almost by accident. When judgment is suspended, something unexpected follows. Calm. The skeptics told a story about a painter named Apelles, who was struggling to paint the foam on a horse's mouth. Frustrated, he gave up and flung his sponge at the painting. And the sponge, striking the canvas, produced the perfect foam. Peace of mind, the skeptics taught, arrives the same way, not by finally winning the argument, but by dropping it. You needn't take skepticism to its extremes. Its critics had great fun asking whether Pyrrho needed friends to steer him away from cliffs he declined to be certain about. But there is real medicine in it, especially at this hour. So much of what keeps a mind churning at night is the compulsion to settle things, to reach verdicts on the day, on other people, on ourselves. The skeptics whisper across the centuries, you don't have to decide tonight. The question can stay open. Most questions can. Let them stay open. We have further to travel. East now, far to the east. Because while Greece was learning to reason, other lands were asking the same great questions in their own voices. The Eastern sages, Confucius, Laozi, and the Buddha. Something remarkable happened in the ancient world. So remarkable that historians have given it a name, the Axial Age. In the span of a few centuries, roughly between 800 and 300 BCE, humanity seems to have woken up in several places at once. While Thales measured shadows in Miletus and Socrates, questioned generals in Athens, teachers in India and China, with no knowledge of the Greeks or of each other, were founding traditions of thought that would shape billions of lives. No one fully knows why it happened everywhere at once, but it did. So let us drift eastward and meet them. In China, in an age of crumbling order and constant war between rival states, a minor official and teacher named Kongqiu, whom the world would come to know as Confucius, asked the question his whole civilization was bleeding over. How can human beings live together in harmony? His answer looked backward and inward. Society, he taught, is a web of relationships, parent and child, ruler and subject, elder and younger, friend and friend. and harmony comes when each person honors their role with genuine virtue, sincerity, loyalty, respect. Not grudging obedience, Confucius had no patience for empty ritual, but cultivated heartfelt humanness, a quality he called Ren. The family, for Confucius, was the first school of goodness. A person who learns love and reverence at home carries it outward into the world. Asked once if there was a single word to guide a whole life, he offered reciprocity. Do not impose on others what you yourself do not desire. The golden rule, voiced in China. Generations before, it was voiced in Galilee. He considered his life a failure. No ruler adopted his counsel. He wandered from court to court, largely ignored, and died believing his teaching had not taken root. He was as wrong as a person can be. Within a few centuries, his thought became the backbone of Chinese civilization, its education, its government, its family life, for 2,000 years, and its influence saturates East Asia to this day. It is one of history's gentlest lessons. You cannot always see, from inside a life, what that life has planted. And alongside Confucius's earnest social vision, Chinese tradition offers its perfect counterweight, the Taoists, and the legendary figure of Laozi, said to be the author of the Tao Te Ching, where Confucius said, "Cultivate, structure, refine," the Taoists smiled and said, "Relax. There is a way, the Tao, flowing through all things like a great river, and wisdom lies not in mastering it, but in moving with it." Water, the Tao Te Ching observes, is the softest thing in the world, and yet it wears away stone. It seeks the low places everyone else despises, and thereby nourishes everything. The Taoists prized Wu Wei, effortless action, the art of not forcing, the way a skilled swimmer stops fighting the current, the way sleep comes precisely when you stop chasing it, which makes Taoism, perhaps, the ideal philosophy for this exact moment of your night. Stop striving, even to fall asleep. Float, and the river carries you. And in India, in the foothills of the Himalayas, a prince named Siddhartha Gautama was raised, the story goes, inside walls built to hide the world's suffering from him. Then, on journeys outside the palace, he saw what his father had hidden: an old man, a sick man, a corpse, and finally a wandering ascetic with a serene face. Shaken to his core, he left the palace, the wealth, his wife and infant son, left it all to solve the problem of suffering. He starved himself nearly to death among the ascetics and found no answer there either. And at last, seated beneath a fig tree, in deep meditation through the night, he arrived at the understanding that made him the Buddha, the awakened one. Life involves suffering, he taught, not only pain, but the subtler ache of impermanence, the way everything we hold slips constantly through our fingers. And suffering has a cause: craving, thirst, the endless grasping for things to be other than they are, for pleasure to stay, for pain to leave, for the self to be permanent in a universe where nothing is. And because suffering has a cause, it has a cure. The release of that grasping, and a practical path toward release, a life of ethical conduct, mental discipline and wisdom, walked step by step. Notice how closely he rhymes with the Hellenistic schools he never met. Like Epicurus, he located misery in unlimited desire. Like the Stoics, he found freedom in the mind's relationship to events rather than the events themselves. Cousins in wisdom, oceans apart, arriving at the same door. The Buddha taught for 45 years and died at 80, lying between two trees, telling his grieving followers that all conditioned things pass away, and to work out their liberation with diligence. His last teaching was the same as his first. Everything changes. The Long Bridge, Philosophy and Faith. As the ancient world grew old, philosophy changed its keeper. Rome fell, slowly, the way an old wall leans and settles, rather than the way a tree cracks. And across Europe, the schools of Athens went quiet. The academy that Plato founded was finally closed in 529 CE, after more than 900 years. For the next 1,000 years in the West, the great questions did not disappear. Great questions never do. But they were asked inside a new house, the house of faith. Philosophy became, as the saying went, the handmaiden of theology. Yet what a conversation it was! Augustine, a brilliant and restless North African who had chased pleasure and exotic doctrines through his youth. "Lord, make me chaste," he famously remembered praying, but not yet, converted to Christianity and poured Plato into its foundations. The realm of perfect forms became the mind of God. The ascent from the cave became the soul's journey toward the divine light. His Confessions, the searching autobiography of his own tangled heart, is sometimes called the first true autobiography. The moment a thinker turned philosophy's lamp fully inward and examined memory, desire, time and self with a depth no one had attempted before. "What then is time?" he asked. "If no one asks me, I know. If I try to explain it, I do not know." 16 centuries later, that is still roughly where physics stands. And while Europe's lamp burned low, the flame was carried elsewhere. This must never be left out of the story. In the great cities of the Islamic world, Baghdad, Cordoba, Cairo, scholars translated, preserved, and extended the Greek inheritance. Avicenna, in Persia, wove Aristotle into towering systems of metaphysics and wrote a medical encyclopedia Europe would study for 600 years. He proposed a thought experiment, a floating man, created suspended in a void, sensing nothing, who would nevertheless know that he exists, that eerily anticipates Descartes by more than half a millennium. Averroes, in Muslim Spain, wrote commentaries on Aristotle so penetrating that Europeans simply called him the commentator. Without these scholars, most of Aristotle would have been lost to the West entirely. When his works finally flowed back into Europe, translated from Arabic through Spain, they hit medieval Christendom like a tide. It fell to a large, quiet Italian friar named Thomas Aquinas. So silent in class, his fellow students called him the dumb ox, to attempt the grand reconciliation. Aristotle's razor-edged logic and Christian faith welded into one enormous cathedral of thought. Reason and revelation, Aquinas argued, cannot ultimately conflict, because both flow from the same source. Philosophy climbs from the world up toward God. Faith descends from God toward the world, and the two meet in the middle. His Summa Theologica runs to thousands of pages of patient, scrupulously fair argument. He states his opponents' objections better than they did. And then, near the end of his life, something happened to him during Mass that he never explained. He stopped writing entirely. "All that I have written," he told his stunned secretary, "seems like straw to me." He died a few months later, his great cathedral of reason left standing, with its builder gone quiet inside it. A fitting hush, perhaps, because the modern world was coming, and it would begin with one man, alone in a warm room, deciding to doubt absolutely everything. The dreamer in the stove-heated room. Descartes. It is the winter of 1619. A 23-year-old Frenchman, a soldier, mathematician, and gentleman adventurer named René Descartes is snowed in somewhere in southern Germany, waiting out the cold in a small stove-heated room. With nothing to do and no one to talk to, he spends the days alone with his thoughts. And in that warm, drowsy solitude, he conceives a project that will crack history in two. The problem, as Descartes saw it, was this. The learned world was a tower of opinions, stacked on opinions. Ancient authorities, inherited assumptions, plausible guesses, and no one had ever checked the foundations. So he proposed a demolition. He would doubt everything, every single belief he held, and see if anything at all, survived. Whatever survived total doubt could serve as bedrock, and knowledge could be rebuilt on it, certain at last. So he begins, and the doubt spreads like water finding cracks. The senses, they deceive. The straight oar looks bent in water. Distant towers change shape as you approach. Worse, dreams. Descartes reflects that he has often dreamt he was sitting by the fire in his dressing gown when he was in fact asleep in bed. And the dream felt completely real. So how does he know he isn't dreaming right now? Can you prove at this moment, warm and still, eyes closed, that you are not? There is no certain test. Very well, the whole physical world goes into the flames of doubt. Even mathematics might fall. Suppose, he says, there were a deceiver of supreme power and cunning, bending all its effort to fool him, planting false thoughts, rigging even his arithmetic. 2 + 3 might feel certain and still be a trick. Everything is now doubted. The world, his body, other people, mathematics itself. He is falling through bottomless uncertainty. And then he lands. Because there is one thing the all-powerful deceiver cannot do. It cannot deceive him if he does not exist. Deception requires a victim. Doubt requires a doubter. The very act of doubting everything proves that something is doing the doubting. And so, at the bottom of the abyss, Descartes strikes rock, and the rock is a sentence, perhaps the most famous sentence in all of philosophy. Cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. He can't yet be sure he has a body. He cannot be sure the room, the stove, the snow, the world exist, but that he exists as a thinking thing, that no demon can take from him. It is the one candle no wind can blow out. From that single point, Descartes tried to rebuild everything. The reconstruction, most philosophers agree, was less successful than the demolition. And along the way, he left us a famous puzzle. If the mind is a thinking, non-physical thing, and the body a physical machine, how do the two interact? How does a thought move a hand? How does a stubbed toe hurt? This mind-body problem still keeps philosophers and neuroscientists up at night, though it needn't keep you up tonight. What matters is what Descartes changed. After him, philosophy's centre of gravity moved inside. The great question was no longer only what exists, but what can I know? And the answer had to be built outward from the one lit room of one's own consciousness. Modern philosophy, and in a real sense the modern self, begins there, with one person alone in the warm dark, thinking, which is, again, more or less where you are. Good company this hour of night. The gentle demolition. Hume. If Descartes rebuilt the Tower of Knowledge, it was a cheerful Scotsman who, with the friendliest smile in the history of philosophy, strolled up a century later and quietly removed the load-bearing walls. David Hume was born in Edinburgh in 1711, and by every surviving account, he was the most likeable of the great philosophers. Fat, sociable, witty, serene, the French called him Le Bon David, the Good David. He wrote his masterpiece, A Treatise of Human Nature, in his 20s. It flopped so completely that he joked it fell dead-born from the press. He never held a university post. His religious skepticism saw to that, and made his living as a librarian, essayist, and historian. And all the while, this genial man was carrying philosophical dynamite. Hume's starting point was simple. All our ideas come from experience. There is nothing in the mind that didn't arrive through the senses, or get assembled from pieces that did. A golden mountain, gold plus mountain, both borrowed from experience. Very well, said Hume. Let's take our most cherished concepts and ask, where in experience did this come from? And one by one, under that innocent-sounding question, they began to dissolve. Take cause and effect, the glue of the universe, the assumption under all science and all daily life. One billiard ball rolls into another, the second moves. You saw the first ball cause the motion, didn't you? Look closer, says Hume. What did you actually see? One event, then another event. Ball A moved, ball B moved. You have seen this conjunction thousands of times. But the causing itself, the necessary connection, the invisible push, where is it? You have never seen it, not once. All you have is habit. The mind, trained by repetition, expects B after A and mistakes its own expectation for a law of nature. Causation, Hume suggests, may be less something we observe in the world than something we feel in ourselves. And it gets deeper. Why do you believe the sun will rise tomorrow? Because it always has. But that reasoning assumes the future will resemble the past. And what's the evidence for that? Only that, in the past, futures have resembled pasts. The argument is circular. It assumes the very thing it's trying to prove. This is Hume's problem of induction, and here is the astonishing part. No one has ever conclusively solved it. Science itself, glorious, world-transforming science, rests at bottom on an assumption that can't be proven, only trusted. Nature has given us instinct where reason runs out, Hume said, and it's a good thing too. Then he turned the lamp on the self and found the same thing. Look inward, right now, drowsy as you are, and try to catch the self, not thoughts, not feelings, but the thing having them. What do you find? A sensation of warmth, a stray image, the sound of my voice, a flicker of memory. Always some particular perception, never the pearl-like eye underneath. The self, Hume proposed, may be nothing but the bundle, a stream of perceptions, flowing, with no one standing on the bank. The Buddha, 22 centuries earlier, had taught almost exactly the same thing. Hume had no idea. The river again, flowing through Edinburgh this time. And yet, here is the part I find most endearing. Hume did not despair and did not expect you to. He noticed that his own skepticism, so overwhelming in the study, evaporated the moment he left it. I dine, I play backgammon, I converse, and am merry with my friends, he wrote. And after a few hours of that, his bleak conclusions seemed so strained that he couldn't find it in his heart to enter into them further. Nature is too strong for argument. We cannot live as skeptics, and we aren't obliged to try. Hold your conclusions lightly, correct them often, be gentle with the beliefs of others, for their foundations are no firmer than yours, and then go to dinner. He faced his own death, calmly, publicly, without religious consolation and without fear, with such good humour that friends came away shaken and comforted at once. And across the North Sea, in a small Prussian city, a punctual little professor read Hume's arguments and was so disturbed that he later said they interrupted his dogmatic slumber. His answer would be the most ambitious philosophical system ever built. The Clockwork Revolutionary. Kant. In the harbour city of Königsberg, in East Prussia, there lived a man so regular in his habits that, the story goes, housewives set their clocks by his afternoon walk. Immanuel Kant, barely 5 feet tall, frail, hollow-chested, a bachelor all his life, who never travelled more than 100 miles or so from the city of his birth. Dinner guests, a daily walk, work, sleep, decade after decade, the same. He is the great counterexample to the idea that an adventurous mind requires an adventurous life. Because inside that clockwork routine, Kant staged what he himself called a Copernican revolution in thought. Here was his problem. Hume had shown that experience alone can't justify our deepest certainties: causation, necessity, the lawfulness of nature. Yet mathematics and physics work. Newton had just written laws that predicted the tides and the planets. How is such certain knowledge possible, if Hume is right? Kant's answer came like a key turning. We have been assuming, he said, that the mind is passive, a mirror, reflecting a ready-made world. Reverse it. What if the mind is active, not a mirror, but a builder? What if space, time, and causality are not features of things in themselves, but the forms our mind imposes on raw experience, the architecture of perception itself? Think of it this way. If you were born wearing rose-tinted glasses that could never come off, everything you ever saw would be rose-coloured, not because the world is rose, but because that is how seeing works for you. Space and time, Kant proposed, are the glasses. Causality is the glasses. We don't find order in the world, we bring it. That's why mathematics holds with certainty. It describes the frame, and nothing can appear to us outside the frame. The price of this move is steep, and Kant paid it unflinchingly. We can never know reality as it is in itself, the noumenon, the world with the glasses off. We know only the world as it appears, the phenomenon. Between us and naked reality hangs a veil woven by our own faculties, and it does not lift. There is something almost devotional in that thought. The universe, in itself, exceeds every possible human view of it. But Kant's deeper fame, the reason his name is carved so deep, is what he did for ethics. Because this timid, tidy little man built the sternest and most exalted moral philosophy in the modern world. Morality, Kant argued, cannot depend on consequences. Consequences are luck, and luck is not moral. Nor can it depend on feelings. Feelings come and go. Morality must bind rationally, the way logic binds, the same for everyone, everywhere, always. And so he sought the one command reason itself issues, and called it the categorical imperative. Its most famous form, act only on principles you could will to be universal laws. Before you act, ask, what if everyone did this? Lying works only because most people tell the truth. Universalize the lie, and it devours itself. The cheat, the queue jumper, the promise breaker. Each is quietly making an exception of himself. And Kant's whole ethics is a refusal of exceptions. And then the second formulation, the one that has echoed through constitutions and human rights charters ever since. Treat humanity in yourself and in every other person always as an end, never merely as a means. Persons are not tools. Every human being, because rational and free, carries a dignity beyond all price, his word, that may never be traded away, not for profit, not for pleasure, not even for the greater good. The Stoics' cosmopolitan spark, refined into a principle you could build a civilization on. Many have tried. The trying continues. Two things, Kant wrote near the end, fill the mind with ever new and increasing admiration and awe, the more often and steadily we reflect on them: the starry heavens above me and the moral law within me. They put that sentence on his grave in Königsberg: the stars above, the conscience within. On a quiet night, drifting where you are, it is still hard to say it better. The Hammer and the Abyss, Schopenhauer and Nietzsche. The 19th century inherited Kant's veiled universe and produced two philosophers, bound together like a dark father and rebellious son, who looked behind the veil and reported very different news. Arthur Schopenhauer was philosophy's magnificent pessimist, wealthy, brilliant, vain, and gloriously bad-tempered. He scheduled his lectures at the same hour as the famous Hegel's, purely out of spite, and lectured to empty rooms while Hegel's hall overflowed. He never forgave the world for it. He lived alone with a succession of poodles, each named Atma, and wrote the most beautiful German prose of his century in the service of a bleak conclusion. Kant's hidden reality, the thing in itself behind all appearances, is not unknowable, said Schopenhauer. We meet it every day from the inside. It is will, a blind, restless, insatiable striving that surges through everything. The force that turns the planets, pushes the sap up the tree, drives the animal to hunt and the human to want and want and want. The whole universe is craving, wearing masks. And this, he argued, is precisely why life hurts. To live is to will is to lack is to suffer, and when a desire is finally satisfied. A brief pause, then boredom, the other pole of the pendulum, then a new desire. Life swings between pain and tedium, forever. It is the Buddha's diagnosis, thirst as the root of suffering, arrived at independently in a Frankfurt study. And when Schopenhauer later discovered the Indian texts, he embraced them with joy, keeping the Upanishads at his bedside. His prescriptions, too, echo the East: compassion. Since all beings are the same will, your suffering is literally mine. And art, above all music, those suspended moments, standing before a painting or inside a melody, when wanting stops, and for a few breaths the restless engine falls silent. Anyone who has been carried out of themselves by a piece of music at midnight knows exactly the mercy he meant. Among his readers was a young philology professor, a pastor's son with weak eyes and violent migraines, who found Schopenhauer's book in a Leipzig second-hand shop and read it in a fever. His name was Friedrich Nietzsche, and he began as a disciple and became the great pessimist's great opposite. Nietzsche accepted the diagnosis: yes, no cosmic plan; yes, existence as striving; yes, suffering woven into the fabric. He rejected the prescription with all his force. Schopenhauer said, "The will is terrible. Turn away, renounce, quiet the engine." Nietzsche answered, "Turn toward. If life is striving, then say yes to striving." His measure of a person became what he called amor fati, love of fate, not merely to endure what happens, still less to hide it, but to be able to will it, to affirm your one actual life, its pain included, rather than pining for a purer world that does not exist. his most haunting thought experiment makes the test vivid. Suppose a demon crept to you in your loneliest night and said, "This life, exactly as you have lived it, every joy and every anguish, every small hour, you will live again and again, innumerable times, nothing new in it, the same sequence forever." Would the thought crush you? Or has there ever been a moment so tremendous that you would answer, "You are a god, and never have I heard anything more divine"? Say it again. The eternal recurrence was not cosmology. It was a scale for weighing a life. How much of your existence could you bear to have back? Live, he urged, so that the answer grows. Nietzsche is famous for 3 words, "God is dead," which are almost always misread as a boast. In the passage where he writes them, they are spoken by a madman with a lantern in anguish to an unbelieving crowd, and they are a warning. European civilization, Nietzsche saw, had quietly stopped believing in the foundation under its values, yet went on living off the inheritance, as if the account could never empty. What happens, he asked, when it does? Who gives us the sponge to wipe away the horizon? His terror was nihilism, the coming age when nothing means anything, and his life's work was the attempt to answer it. If the old tables of values have crumbled, then humanity must become strong enough, honest enough, creative enough to write new ones, to become, each of us, in his phrase, the poets of our own lives. The end of his story is dark and strange. In Turin, in January 1889, Nietzsche saw a cab horse being whipped in the street, ran to it, threw his arms around its neck, and collapsed. The breakdown, likely organic in cause, was total. The hammer of Europe spent his last 11 years in silence, cared for by his mother and sister, unaware that his books, unread all his working life, were now catching fire across the world. Whatever else one makes of him, grant him this. He asked the modern question before the modern world knew it had one. When the old answers fail, what makes a life worth affirming? And he refused every comfortable evasion of it. That question was now loose in the world. The 20th century would have to live it. The courage to exist, Kierkegaard, Sartre, and Camus. The philosophy that took up Nietzsche's question came to be called existentialism, though its first voice had actually spoken decades before Nietzsche in Copenhagen, in the person of a melancholy, sharp-witted Dane named Søren Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard's target was the comfortable idea that life's deepest matters could be settled from the spectator's seat, by systems, by proofs, by going along with the crowd. Truth, he insisted, in the matters that count, how to live, whom to love, what to stake your existence on, is not a formula you look up, but a commitment you make, alone, trembling, without guarantees. He knew the trembling personally. He broke off his engagement to Regine Olsen, the love of his life, for reasons he spent volumes half explaining, and the wound never closed. Out of it he wrote about anxiety, which he called the dizziness of freedom, the vertigo you feel standing before an open future that you, and no one else, must choose. Anxiety, in his telling, is not a malfunction. It is what freedom feels like from the inside. Anyone lying awake before a big decision has stood on Kierkegaard's cliff edge. A century later, in occupied and then liberated Paris, Jean-Paul Sartre gave the movement its slogan, "Existence precedes essence." A paper knife, Sartre said, is designed before it is made. Its essence precedes its existence. Human beings are the one case where the order is reversed. First we exist, thrown into the world without a blueprint, and then, through our choices, we invent what we are. There is no fixed human nature to consult, no script backstage. We are, in his famous phrase, condemned to be free, condemned because we never chose freedom, cannot resign from it, and are responsible even when we pretend not to be. Pretending was what interested him most. The waiter who plays at being only a waiter, the person who says I had no choice when they mean the choice was hard. He called it bad faith, the small daily art of hiding one's freedom from oneself. His companion in thought and life, Simone de Beauvoir, turned the same lens on the situation of women. One is not born a woman, she wrote, but becomes one, and helped found modern feminist philosophy in the process. But the existentialist most likely to sit with you gently at this hour is Albert Camus, the Algerian-born goalkeeper, resistance journalist and novelist with a face like a film star, who protested all his life that he wasn't an existentialist at all. Camus fixed his gaze on one problem, which he called the absurd, the collision between the human heart, which cries out for meaning, and the universe, which answers with beautiful silence. We long for purpose. The stars do not reply. That mismatch, not the world alone, not us alone, but the gap between, is the absurd, and Camus refused both easy exits, neither despair nor a leap into comforting illusions. Live the tension, he said, lucidly, even defiantly. His emblem was Sisyphus, the man from Greek myth condemned by the gods to roll a boulder up a mountain forever, watching it tumble down each time, walking down after it each time. Forever. The perfect image of futile labor. The gods thought it the worst punishment they could devise. And Camus performs one of the great reversals in all of philosophy. Watch Sisyphus, he says, in that pause at the top, watching the stone roll down, turning, beginning his descent. In that moment he is conscious. He knows the whole of his fate, and it does not crush him. The rock is his thing, his task, his own. There is no fate, Camus writes, that cannot be surmounted by scorn, and by something warmer than scorn, too. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a human heart. And then the last line, the one people carry in their wallets. One must imagine Sisyphus happy, not happy because the boulder stays up. It never will. Happy because the task is his, the mountain air is real, and he has stopped demanding that the universe underwrite his life before he consents to live it. Meaning for Camus is not found. It is made out of rebellion, freedom, passion, out of friendship and sunlight and work worth doing. Made daily, the way bread is made, and no less nourishing for being human-sized. It is, when you sit with it, a strangely restful thought for the end of an evening. The universe owes you no explanation, and you in turn owe it no despair. The limits of the sayable, Wittgenstein. There is one last thinker to meet tonight, and he is, perhaps, the strangest and most fitting place for our long journey to end. Because after 26 centuries of philosophers asking questions, this one turned around and asked a stranger question still. What if some of the deepest things simply can't be said at all? His name was Ludwig Wittgenstein, and he may be the most unusual figure in the whole history of philosophy. Born in Vienna in 1889, into one of the wealthiest families in Europe, he gave away his entire enormous fortune. He trained as an engineer, then abandoned it for philosophy. He served in the trenches of the First World War and worked out some of his deepest ideas under fire, scribbling in a notebook he carried into battle. He worked at various times as a village school teacher, a hospital porter, and a gardener. He was tormented, brilliant, and utterly uninterested in comfort. And he wrote 2 philosophies in one lifetime, the second of which spent years dismantling the first. Almost no great philosopher has ever had the courage to say, in effect, "I was wrong, let me begin again." He did it in front of everyone, but it is his first book that gives us the perfect thought to end on. A small, strange, crystalline book, written partly in the trenches, called the Tractatus. In it, Wittgenstein set out to map the very limits of language, to draw a line around what words can and cannot do. His conclusion was this: language, he argued, works by picturing facts about the world. The cat is on the mat. The water is boiling. These are things language can say clearly because they picture arrangements of things in the world. And the proper business of philosophy, he thought, was simply to make our language clear, to untangle the confusions that arise where words slip loose from their meaning. But then came the turn, the beautiful, haunting turn. Because Wittgenstein believed that the things that matter most to us, the meaning of life, the nature of goodness, the existence of God, the reason there is something rather than nothing, these lie outside what language can picture. They are not false, they are not nonsense, they are simply beyond the reach of words, the way a melody is beyond the reach of a paragraph, the way love is beyond the reach of any sentence that tries to hold it. About these things, he said, language can only fall silent. And so we end with one of the most famous lines in all of philosophy, a line that has echoed for 100 years, and that is, I think, the perfect thought to carry down into sleep. Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. He did not mean it coldly, he meant it almost reverently. The most important things in life, the things that give it meaning, the things we feel at the edge of sleep, or standing under the stars, or holding someone we love, these things do not need to be argued. They do not need to be proven, or defined, or defended. They can only be lived and felt and shown. And in the presence of them, the wisest response is not another sentence. It is silence. And what a gift that is at the end of a long day. After all the questions, all the arguments, all the centuries of words, permission at last to stop, to let the talking end, to rest in the quiet where language runs out and something deeper begins. And so the story is told. The fire has burned low. Outside, you may have noticed, the storm has finally softened, the rain gentler now against the window, the wind no longer howling but only sighing. The worst of the night already passed while we sat here together. It always does pass in the end. That's the thing about storms and about long, dark nights. They feel endless while you're inside them. And then, quietly, they aren't. We've come a long way tonight, you and I. And here, at the end of it, there's really only one thing worth remembering. And even that you can let go of by morning. Not one of the great questions we followed was ever finally answered. And that was never the point. The point was never to arrive. It was the walking, the wondering itself, the way it makes a mind a little more honest, a little more humble, a little more awake. The examined life was never a destination. It was always just a way of travelling. And tonight you travelled it well. So rest now. You don't need to carry any of it with you. Leave the philosophers here, on my shelves, where they live. They've kept for 2,600 years, and they'll keep until morning. and long past it. And if you drifted off somewhere along the way, then you're already exactly where this whole long journey was always meant to lead. There is no better place to lose the thread of a story than into sleep. I'll leave the fire burning a while longer. The chair across from mine will still be here. It always is. And whenever the nights grow long again and you find yourself wandering, you know the way back now. The lamp in the window will be lit. The door will be open. And I'll have another story ready, pulled down from the deep shelves, waiting for you. That's what this place is for. That's what I'm here for. To keep the old stories safe through the dark. And to read them softly to travellers like you, until the storm passes and morning comes. Let the questions keep. Let the day go. Let the wondering rest, just until morning. Rest well, traveller.